This is an M-rated game, so viewer discretion is advised. Spirit Hunter Death Mark 2. I'm not a big fan of horror games, not because I'm squeamish, but because I don't like games where you have to use stealth or running away from creatures. I find it boring or frustrating. When I saw the screenshots of this title, I thought it looked more like an adventure game than an avoid the monster type game. And playing it, I could say I was right. For the most part, there is no time limit in the areas. There are parts where you have to find the cursed item before you die, but these parts are fairly rare and they're very easy to find. I would call this a visual novel with some point and click adventure elements to it. I did like the idea. It was just too bad that the story is so slow for my tastes. It had its moments, but had too many obvious plot holes and a lot of questionable decisions by the main character. The story is about Kaizo Yakashi, who's come to investigate a ghost story at Konohara Academy. They have been getting letters from someone called the Departed, who's threatening to kill an unnamed student. They always use some generic description for them, so they're never going to know who they need to protect. The headmaster makes him a teacher as a cover, so he can investigate without the students finding out. However, he is terrible at saving anyone, or coming up with plans to avoid situations. More than once, a character gets tricked by a cell phone call. You would think after the first time they would come up with a code word or something. The bodies will pile up, and somehow he isn't fired. They do threaten it later in the game, but because he's the main character, they say, well, if one more kid dies, you're gonna be dismissed. He should have been gone the first or second time that a kid was brutally killed. This game will not hold back on any of the gore. There's usually a visual, written, and sounds to all the kills, and I thought some of them were actually quite inventive. Now you might be wondering, how does a school stay open with a bunch of kids dying in it? Well, the bodies disappear without a trace. The creature called the Departed loves the main character and wants him to stick around, so it somehow gets rid of all the evidence. The Departed isn't the only one who has feelings for the protagonist, as there are two female students who just won't leave him alone. So much so, he gets written up for an inappropriate relationship with these two girls. And to his credit, he is totally innocent. These two girls just keep joining him on these ghost adventures. And even after it's been pointed out to him that this looks very bad, he still has no courage to tell these girls to go away. Call the dorm, the police, anyone to get these girls to just go home. Helping you on your adventure will be people from the previous games in the series, I assume. I never played the other games, but they say they're ghost hunters and they were all involved in some big case a few months ago, which I guess is the first Deathmark game. They were very interesting. They all came up with cover stories why they were here, and they would often just show up for one chapter only. However, there were a couple that stayed for a few chapters towards the end of the game. I don't understand why they bothered introducing all these characters if they weren't going to use them in the final act. When you're investigating the different ghost cases that are all over the school, you're going to take someone with you. They might give you advice, or sometimes you might need their strength to open something, or their thin arms to retrieve something. So you're going to have to decide who you want on these adventures. But for the most part, they're pretty interchangeable. The investigations, depending on the chapter, could vary to being okay to tedious. The worst chapters were the very first ones which you investigate, which was the ghost story of Hanako of the Toilet. Yes, that's the name of the ghost. It was so boring. You have to go into random rooms to find nothing and then move on to the next room. I think the main campus had 3 floors with 6 or 7 rooms to explore on each floor, and that includes the bathrooms. Then you go into the old building, which is just a carbon copy of the main campus, so you have to do the exact same thing again. The whole reason to go in the rooms is to find people who will give you clues on the ghosts, or to find eerie teeth, which can be used to level up your character. And you can trade them for items which will give you advantages in the best part of this game, the Suspenseful axe. It was a very clever idea. You come up against a dangerous situation, and you have a limited amount of options based on what you're holding in your inventory. Then they'll have you use it in different ways based on the options they give you. They also give you a percentage on if it will work. And then the computer rolls an imaginary 100-sided dice to see if it works. If it fails, usually you don't get penalized, but you do lose the HP that it costs to do the move. Even if it's the right answer, you could still fail the roll, and you're going to have to try it again. Except this time the percentage to succeed is going to be much higher. You can team up in these sections to make it easier to get a successful action, but you both lose hit points. And if you go down to 0, you're going to die, and you're going to have to go back to your last save. They do give you a lot of leeway though. And if you've been collecting the teeth that have been scattered throughout the chapter, it makes this much easier. Finding the teeth though is optional, and if you like a challenge, don't bother finding them, but they do help. The biggest negative to this was that the action that you need to do wasn't always clear. There was a point where I had to fire a gun at a ghost, and this feels like it would have been the wrong answer. And even the ghost was confused when I did it, but it delayed it, so it was the right answer. Most of the time though, if you think back to the case, you can figure out what it wants you to do. But there were some times where it was really just a lucky guess. After you beat the game, you unlock a special case, which I think brings in another character from another Deathmark game to help you solve it. Spirit Hunter Deathmark 2 was okay. I did like the ending, but getting there was a little boring at times. I did like how it was a visual novel and an adventure game. The two mixed well. Some of the ghosts that you investigate were interesting, and one was really well paced. So much so I was wishing it was the rule and not the exception. I would wait for this to go on sale, and I mean a deep sale. It wasn't a bad game, but you really have to like ghost investigation games. The suspenseful acts are the best part of this, and they're really enjoyable. But if you're gonna play this, I would wait for it to go on sale.